Today's daf is daf Mem Aleph, and we'll begin with Omer of Ashi, 3 lines down from the top. Now, what we need to know for an easy takeoff today is that we learned about a machlokes between Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yochanan. And the issue was what's called chilul, peros, kedushas, shvius. How do you achieve that chilul? And Rabbi Elazar has a very limited possibility, and it's called mekach. If there's a payment of money for peros shvius, then the sanctity of the peros shvius is now chal on the mos. And the mos become what you'd call a second degree kedusha shvius. Fascinating is that, as we saw yesterday, the peros shvius themselves nevertheless retained their status as kadosh. He didn't gain that much. Now both the mos, the domim that he paid in the mekach, as well as the peros shvius, are both sanctified with kedusha shvius. Rabbi Yochanan has a broader scope and a more liberal possibility, comparing shvius to hegdesh. Just like hegdesh could have chilul, which means you don't need derech mekach. You could just simply put the mos on the table, hegdesh on the table, and then you can be machalel onto the mos. You don't need derech mekach. Omer Avashi, machlokes b'pri richon, aval b'pri sheni, divrei hakol, bein derech mekach, bein derech chilul. Rav Ashi is coming to limit the position and the ruling of Rabbi Elazar. When Rabbi Elazar insists that chilul has to take place through mekach, that was only as far as the first degree kedusha shvius, which means the peros themselves that grew during shvius and was sanctified with kedusha shvius. To achieve and implement a chilul here, Rabbi Elazar requires that it be mekach, derech mekach. But if it's already a second degree kedusha shvius, so now we're no longer talking about the original peros, but rather we're talking about some element or item, or maybe it's domim in the case of money, that has a second degree. You've already achieved derech mekach. So you bought peros shvius, the money now that was paid to the seller who sold you peros shvius, that money is now sanctified with kedusha shvius. That was derech mekach. But now if you take those monies, even Rabbi Elazar would agree that you could be machal them bein derech mekach, bein derech chilul. Derech chilul means you can take those mos, put them on the table, and you can transfer the kedusha. Of course, it goes without saying that according to Rav Ashi, in his definition of machlokes between Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yochanan is disagreeing even with regard to pre-rishon, which means those peros that were grown, that grew during shvius. Rabbi Yochanan allows you to do a chilul. You don't need a derech mekach. And here's where Rabbi Elazar disagrees. But when you get to pre-sheni, which is already second degree, then according to Rav Ashi, even Rabbi Elazar would agree that you could be machal derech chilul. You don't need derech mekach. So the Gemara immediately is bothered by this. V'hakatani lakach lakach. Remember yesterday's brayso, there was a whole chadgadia, where he transferred the kedusha onto mos, and from mos onto basar, basar onto dogim, and so forth and so on. And in every case, the word that repeats itself time after time in the brayso is lakach. So we see that even with regard to second degree, third degree, etc., chilul, you need derech mekach. And Rav Ashi defends himself. He says, I need the tani reisha lakach, tani nami seifa lakach. Since in the reisha, when he talks about the original transfer of the peros that themselves, it needs mekach, and according to Rabbi Elazar, only mekach. That was the Tana of the Kavasei. Therefore, the brayso uses time and time again, for purposes of literary symmetry, the word mekach. And that's called, which you'll see all over Shas, Ivy Tani Reisha, Tani Nami Seif. Esvei Ravina Ravashi. And now Ravina is going to completely smash Ravashi. Ravashi is going to have to backtrack from his original statement. Because Ravina, is going to challenge Ravashi from a different brisa. The brisa addresses the following issue. If, let's say, for example, you need a pair of clothing, a suit you have to buy, and what you have in your possession in terms of cash to go into a store, and your favorite, local clothing stores, he's a buddy of yours, and you want to buy a suit from your buddy who's selling, I'll tell you in a minute why I say he's his buddy, he's selling clothing, but all you have in your pocket are dmei shvius, which means monies that were received for shvius, and that's called second degree kedusha shvius. Now, the law of shvius is that it has to be designated for a mitzvah of li'achla. Li'achla, and then we said, of course, it says lachem l'chol tzorchechem, anything similar to li'achla. And what's similar to li'achla is a benefit that you get that is enjoyed within a certain limited amount of time. It's almost immediate. And that's similar to li'achla. But in the case of buying clothing, the hana, the benefit that he's going to get is long-term. He doesn't use this garment, this suit for a month or even a year. He uses it long-term. So the law is that you cannot fulfill kedusha shvius by buying a garment. So this price addresses the following case. The man is in a bind. He needs to buy a suit. All he has is dmei shvius, and that limits him. He's not allowed to buy a suit. Well, what solution can we offer him? That's the money that he has to buy. He wants to buy a cloak or a shirt or a garment of some sort. Can we offer him some sort of a way of circumventing the problem of Perush Shvius? Because as we said before, anything that has Kedusha Shvius, in this case the most, has a second degree Kedusha Shvius, must be earmarked for li'achla. He cannot buy a cloak with it. So yelech etzel chedvani haragil etzlo, meaning that he's a very good customer of a certain store owner. They're on very good terms. They have a long-term relationship, so he can ask him to help him out in this way. Omerlo teili besela peros. I am going to give you this sela and give me its value in peros. Okay. So now this store owner who sells clothing, he gives him peros in exchange for the seller. Now watch it, because the store owner, who's now an accomplice to the crime, so to speak, he's helping out this person who his good buddy wants to buy clothes. He is now holding on to peros that have the status.
No, he has the money. Guy had the money, gave peros.
Right. The store owner has mos that has kedusha shvius. Didn't know St. Lo. So now the store owner gives peros in exchange for the seller. But chosev yomalo harei peros halolu nesunim lechav matan. So take a look at Rashi. Rashi says harei peros halolu. It's about 10, 12 lines down from the top. Everybody have that? Harei peros halolu. Shemacharta li shaloy shalchulin v'nichnesu l'kedusha shvius, so that the store owner, the clothing store owner, had peros that were chulin, but now when he sells those peros in exchange for the domin, the most, which have kedusha shvius, now the peros have kedusha shvius. Is therefore nifnesu l'kedusha shvius, is Nisunim L'Chava Matana. Now, the recipient, like the one who wants to buy the clothing, he now gives these peros back to the store owner as a gift. And the store owner says, meaning, let's swap gifts. If you're willing to give me those peros as a maton, I'll give you a sela as a gift. That sela is chulin. It never had kedusha. We told me sela. Now we can buy the garment with that sela. But now, as a result, the Chenvani received a gift of peros, and those peros are sanctified and endowed with kedusha shmiyas. Rashi says, "V'Chenvani yochal peros b'toras shmiyas." Now we begin to understand two things. Number one, how he circumvented the problem of the damin, which he cannot use to buy the clothing, and that we did by making the exchange with the peros, and the peros now pick up the kedusha. The only thing is that now, in lieu of those peros, the Chenvani gives Mos damin to his buddy, who can now buy a cloak. We have that problem, but we have another issue, and that is that the Chenvani himself is stuck with peros that have endowed with kedusha shmiyas. But Rashi says that's what a good friend does. He wants to encourage that friendship, and he's willing to agree.
The seller that he paid, the one who had the money, the seller was kedusha shmiyas.
Yeah.
They gave it to the
Store
owner,
keeper.
store gave him peros.
Right.
Now you're saying he gave him that same seller back, or
No, a different one. He gave him chulin.
or gave him chulin?
Right.
So
He's giving him chulin, and he's getting the peros, which again have kedusha shmiyas, because again the original deal would transfer the kedusha over to the peros. And now he takes out a seller, Rashi says, of chulin, he gives it to him as a gift. As we said before, now he could use the chulin to buy the suit. But in any event, Ravina points out, the pre-sheni who, by definition, we started with damin. Damin is always pre-sheni, because pre-rishon is that which grew from the ground. That's edible. That's fruit. So the damin must have been sheni, vikatani, and yet in the solution to the problem that this price addresses, it says derech mekach, that the holder of the Mos of chulin, Mos of shviyas, is going to make a barter exchange with peros. Why do we need that?
it's pre-sheni where you need it.
Right? You're telling me, Rav Ashi, that in pre-sheni, everybody agrees that you can do a derech chilul. You don't need derech mekach. Why did he just take this Mos and transfer it? He doesn't need any help from anybody, from a friend. He just can transfer it over to peros. So the Brisa indicates that derech mekach is derech chilul, that even a pre-sheni is only derech mekach, and again reflecting the shita Rebbe Elazar. But even in pre-sheni, Elam or Rav Ashi. So Rav Ashi is forced to backtrack, and he says just the opposite. Machlokes b'pre-sheni. In other words, Rabbi Elazar, let's start with Rabbi Yochanan. That's a little bit cross out. Rabbi Yochanan agrees fundamentally that to some extent we are limited in the process of chilul kedusha shviyas to Mecca, but that's only as far as pre-rishon. And Rabbi Elazar extended that limitation to require derech mekach even to pre-sheni. So our focus for pre-sheni. Avol the pre-rishon, even Rabbi Yochanan would agree to be a kol derech mekach in derech chilul. For Hadik Tani Echad Shvius, the Echad Meiser Shedi. So we had a brisa which compared Shvius and Meiser Shedi. My Shvius, the May Shvius. So the Gemara says the brisa seems to assume that even Shvius itself, because we're talking about Paris of Shvius. Shvius usually means Paris of Shvius. And the Brisa says that in both cases, you can achieve Chilul even without Derech Mekach. That seems to be the implication. Now you're telling me that as far as the Paris of Shvius is concerned, everybody agrees that you need Derech Mekach. And this Brisa of Echad Shvius, Echad Meiser Shedi seems to assume that we're not talking Derech Mekach because Meiser Sheni doesn't require Derech Mekach. And the Gemara answers no. My Shvius to May Shvius. The word Shvius in this brisa is not referring to Peri Rishon, but rather to Peri Sheni. Dilo Tema Achi, if you're not going to agree with me, is Meiser b'Meiser Mamish. Are you telling me that Meiser is referring to Peros, as if to say that he can be Machal Peros of Meiser Sheni onto other Peros? That's not true. Baksiv, the Torah says in the Parasha Meiser Sheni, V'tzarta kesef biyadecha. And the word tzarta means a tzura. Every coin has on it a stamp, it's minted. Elotmei Meiser, you have no choice, but in the case of Meiser, to assume that the chilul of Meiser Sheni is being effectuated on Domin. And therefore, Hachinami Tmei Shvius. Shvius is also not referring to the pairs themselves, where according to Rav Ashi's new formulation, everybody agrees that you can only be Mechal Derech Mekach, but rather it's referring to Dmei Shvius, which is what we call second degree Kiddush. The Mishnah establishes Barishona Hayalul of Mital the Migdash Shiva. When the Migdash stood, the Torah says Usmachtem Lefnei Hashem Elokechem Shivas Yomim. And that means that the Simcha in the Migdash took place with the Lulav, with the 4 meaning. And that's for the entire Sukkah. That's called Shiva. It's all 7 days. But Medina, this is before, as we'll soon see, the Takana of Rabbi Yochanan, and the Torah says, L'kachtem lachem outside of the Migdash. It's only the first day of Sukkot. Now Rabbi Yochanan wants to make a zecher leMikdash, and just like when the Mikdash stood, they took the lulav all 7 days. Is Hiskin Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai she'ehei lulav nital b'Medina shiva, that even outside the confines of the Beis Hamikdash, the lulav would be taken all 7 days between zecher leMikdash. Okay. So that's the ratio of our Mishnah. Now the Mishnah goes on to discuss the following question. When the Mikdash stood, all the new crop of the year, which is called Chadash, was us, up until the time when the Omer was brought. So let's say we're on the 16th day of Nisan, right? The second day of Pesach, that's called Mimachar Sashah. And the Omer is going to be brought Lamazagin at 10 a.m. on the 16th of Nisan. From 10 a.m. and on, all Chadash becomes Yach. Now we're after the Churban. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai asks the following question, addresses the question. We no longer have the Beis Hamikdash. The Omer is not being brought. At what point does Chadash become Yacham? And Rabbi Yochanan's answer is Yom Hanef Kulo Asa. The entire day of the 16th is Asa, as if to say that since in the Beis Hamikdash, even though normally, let's say they would bring the Omer at 10 a.m., but they can bring it as late as Shkia, up until the end of the day. So therefore, we should wait until the end of the day and do what they would have done in Mikdash if they were waiting to see when the Omer was brought and the Omer was delayed until the end of the day. So let's be machmir to the end of the day. So first, we see the Gemara. Where is the source for this entire concept that we see over and over again of Zeichel HaMikdash? Minolan Tavdinon Zeichel HaMikdash. Rabbi Yochanan. So we have two psukim here. Rabbi Yochanan opens our discussion with the pasuk in Yirmiyah, and the pasuk says, Amar Kra, Ki a'aleh arucha lach. So God is talking about creating a cure for the Jewish people. And the end of the pasuk says, Ki nidacha karu lach. Now this has to do with Christian theology. And they said about the nation of Israel that we've been rejected, chas v'shalom. And if the Goyim are saying that we are rejected, look at what they add. Sion hi doresh Elam. Look at Jerusalem. Look at Zion. Who's seeking Yerushalayim? Doresh. Who's being Doresh Sion? And that's our proof that God has forsaken you. And that your covenant has been terminated. Chas v'shalom. So the Gemara Darshans Bichlal, we see from this the boy Drisha, that we should be Doresh Sion. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai determined from this pasuk that we should be Doresh Sion. So I made a mistake before I said there were two psukim. Actually, it's only one. Now we go on to the Omer discussion and the Heter Chadash. V'sheyehei Yom Henef, that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai requires that we remain and postpone any change as far as Chadash until the end of the day, 60, my time. So the Gemara says that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was nervous about the following scenario, and therefore he made this gzera. We hope that next year we'll have the Beis HaMikdash. This is Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, it's a while ago. Anyway, V'yomru, and they'll say, last year, when there was no Mikdash, according to the strict letter of the law, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai would allow you to eat Chadash, meaning you consider Chadash as Yoshem from the earliest moment that you could possibly bring the Karban Omer, which is Heir HaMizrach, with daybreak. But if we're going to allow you today, after Churban, to eat Chadash as Yoshan after Heir HaMizrach, then tomorrow, meaning next year, when Amir Hashem, the Mikdash will be built, people are going to remember what they did last year, and they don't think you have to wait for the Omer. They think that with daybreak of the 16th, now's the time to make the celebration. Let's eat all the Chadash. And Hashtanami Mech. The Inulo Yadi, but where is their mistake? They don't realize that Shtake last year, we were allowed to eat from daybreak. The Lohavi Beis HaMikdash, there was no Karban Omer. And the Torah says, the Etzem Hayom Hazeh, as far as the Heter Chodesh, the Torah says on this day itself, which begins with daybreak, Heir HaMizrach Hitit. The Torah, without the Mikdash, is going to allow you to look at the moment, the earliest moment when possibly you could bring the Omer, and that's when Chodesh becomes Mut. But Ashter, now the Mikdash is built, the Iker Beis HaMikdash, Omer Matu. Here's where the Torah says that after you bring the Omer, it says, Lechem v'kali v'karmel lo tochlu ad etzem yizah ad haviachem es karban alokechem. If there is a possibility of the Karban, the Mikdash stands, and you have to wait until Ad Haviachem, until the Karban is actually brought. So therefore, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai instituted a Gzera, and he said that we're going to prohibit the entire day. Now, wait a second. What do you mean prohibit the entire day? Well, why should that be so? You're worried about the Mikdash being built. So let's say, when did they bring the Omer if the Mikdash stood? They brought it at 9 o'clock, they brought it at 10 o'clock, at 11 o'clock. Why do you prohibit the entire day of the 16th of Nisan until the day ends? And the Gemara now investigates a number of different possible scenarios until it finally comes to the conclusion. The Ivnei Amos, when will the Mikdash be rebuilt? If they'll build the Mikdash, the third Mikdash, on the 16th of Nisan, well, what are you worried about? Hare Hitir, Heir HaMizrach. Already with Heir HaMizrach, you're allowed to eat Menachada. So what are you worried about? El De'ivnei B'Chamesar, let's say it would be rebuilt earlier than the 16th, the 15th or earlier. So we still don't understand why Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai had to prohibit the entire day, Mechatzos Hayom, Ulahalon Tishrei. And he certainly, the Mikdash will be very careful, Zrizim, and they will see to it that the Omer is brought no later than midday. Thus now we have a Mishnah in Masechet Menachos. That's where the Sugi of Omer is. They didn't have social media. So let's say you're living at a distance out there in Rosh Pina, right, in the farms there, and you don't know when you're allowed to eat Chadash. Is mutar mechatzos hayom v'ha'ala. You can certainly assume that they were very careful in the Beis HaMikdash to bring the Omer by no later than Chatzos, Lefi she'ein bezdin misatzlim bo. There was a special bezdin that would supervise the Avodas HaMikdash, and they would surely guarantee that the Omer would be brought no later than midday. So why did you have to prohibit the entire day? Lo tzricha de'ivnei b'leil. Now misamach l'shkiyasa. Okay, there's a problem here because we don't build a mikdash at night. But let's say we solve that problem. Rashi, 2 lines from the bottom of the Omer is going to try to solve it. But let's leave that on the side. What happens if they rebuild the mikdash on the night going into the 16th or after Shkia of the 15th? It's going to take a long time until they get the Mizbeach up and running, until the Omer will be brought. And we're afraid that maybe the Omer will be brought at the latest possible time at the end of the day. Therefore, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai instituted that now that there's no Mikdash, and we're afraid of therefore, the entire day of the 16th is us. So Rashi says, how is it possible that the building the Mikdash at night? After all, the Gemara Shavuos establishes that Ein Benyan based on Mikdash B'Layla. So Rashi answers that Hani Milin Binyan Aboni B'Tei Adam Avol Mikdash HaAsid Shalom Etzakev Banui Meshuchal Hu Yigle V'Yavo Mishamayim. So it's going to come down from the heavens. That's called Mikdash Hashem Konenu Yodech. Omer Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, Omer Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai B'Shitas Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai B'Shitas Rabbi Yehuda Amora. Rav Nachman suggests a whole other interpretation of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai in terms of waiting the entire 16 before Yamatir Chodesh. And he identifies Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai with the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda, the Omar Min HaTorah Hu Diyos. And Rabbi Yehuda is of the opinion that on a Doraisa level, we cannot eat from the new crop, from the Chadash, until the end of the 16th. And he's going to derive this